One of the most important aspects of songwriting is writing chord progressions. And we so often start with a chord progression, using it as a framework to then add our lyrics, our melodies, our textures, our embellishments. And yet one of the biggest challenges we face with writing chord progressions is knowing what chords to use. And so today I want to talk to you about picking the perfect chords for whatever song you're writing. In this video, I'm going to talk about how chords fit together. I'm going to talk about the relationships between the chords in your songs, and I'm going to talk about the functionality of the chords that you're choosing. Most importantly, I want to show you a process for writing chord progressions that doesn't feel random, that doesn't get repetitive, and that gives you total control over the direction you'd like to take your song. Now, when writing a song and starting with a chord progression, it's very natural for a bunch of questions to be going through your head, and we all experience this. And some of these questions might be, now that I've started, where do I go next with this chord progression? What options do I have in this key? Why isn't my chord progression working or sounding the way I want it to? What kind of mood am I trying to create, and how can I find the right chords to create that mood? Which chords are going to work best to deliver my message and support my lyrics? And how can I stop my chord progressions from sounding repetitive, possibly boring or predictable? Now, in this video, we're going to talk about diatonic chord progressions, and I'll explain a little bit more what that means. But essentially, we're talking about a system where all the chords belong in the same key. They all fit together beautifully. And in order to understand the diatonic system, it's best if we use the number system that's commonly used. So let's look at the key of C and talk about the chords that are diatonic to this key. We start with our home chord. There's our 1, that's our home bass. We then move to our D minor, which is our 2 chord. We then move to our 3 chord, which is our E minor. We then move to our 4 chord, which is our F. We move to our 5 chord, which is our G. We move to our 6 chord, which is our A minor. We move to our 7 chord, which is our B diminished. And then we come back home to C. Those 7 chords are diatonic to the key of C. Those are the 7. And you'll notice that when we're analyzing a diatonic system, we have our 1 chord, we have our 4 chord, and we have our 5 chord as major. We then have our 2 chord, our 3 chord, our 6 chord as minor. And finally, we have our 7 chord as a diminished. And this is important because the 1-4-5 is a staple of so many genres: blues, rock, roots, you name it, folk. They're all built on that 1-4-5. It's such a big part of our musical language. But what I want to talk to you about today is the function of those chords, and then the function of the minor chords in relation to the home chord. The home chord really is so crucial because really, when we're writing a chord progression, what we're doing is we're establishing a home base, and then we're leaving home, and then we're finding ways to come back home. You're only ever on the home chord, or you're on a chord that's not the home chord. So you're either at home or you've departed from home. And so this idea of playing around with harmony and coming up with interesting and dynamic chord progressions really is a process of deciding when you want to be at home and when you want to be away from home, and finding interesting ways of working your way back to the home key. So let's break down the functions of these chords. Functionally, we know 1 to be solid. It is stable. It is home base. So we start there. Now, if we go to our 4 chord, 4 chord represents departure. We've left home. It's moved away in a way that feels satisfying and hopeful. But then we have the 5 chord, and the 5 chord in Western harmony represents this sense of returning home, getting ready to return. So by playing a 1, 4, 5, 1 progression, what you're really saying is we're at home, we've departed, we're getting ready to come back home, and we return. that's the functionality of those chords in relation to each other. And this is hugely helpful when you're writing a particular kind of song where you want that feeling of departure and return. But as you're going to see when we break down some well-known songs and all chord progressions have this movement of home, departing, coming back home, departing, coming back home. It's the way all chord progressions work. And what gets interesting is when you start looking at some substitutions for those common 1-4-5 maneuvers. One of the great ways to hear this functionality in action is to look at a blues. And a blues, let's play it in the key of G. If we go, there's our 1, there's our 4, back to the 1. So we've gone away from home and then we've come back. Now we're going to depart again. Come back home. Now we're going to the 5. Get ready to come home. And we're home. Get ready to come back round to the beginning. And that is the 12-bar blues form that we all know and love, laid out functionally. This idea of the 1 chord very much being the tonal center, the 4 chord taking us away from that tonal center before we come back home, hitting the 5 chord, getting ready to return via the 4 chord this time, and then coming back home. So again, you are choosing with your chord progressions, rather than randomly selecting chords, you're choosing when you want to be at home and when you want to be departing from home. And what's great about this technique is you get to choose how long you delay the resolution back to home. Because sometimes we do want to create a little bit more tension by keeping the progression from resolving back to that home key. Okay, so let's talk about the substitutions. Let's talk about where these other chords fit in functionally. If we were to break down the 1 chord, every home key or every home chord has what we call a relative minor. And in this case, it's the A minor. They're so closely related that we can think of them as substitutions for each other, in the sense that C is very much a major tonality sound. It's bright, it's happy, it's stable. The A minor is darker. It's got that minor third in it. But essentially, they share 2 of the same 3 notes. So you have C comprised of C, E, G, and you have A minor comprised of A, C, E. So 2 out of the 3 notes are exactly the same. And we'll see this happen a lot as we move through the other substitutions. So your first big alternative to the 1 chord is the relative minor. There is another alternative to the 1 chord, and that is the 3 chord, the E minor. Now the E minor is interesting because, again, if we break down an E minor chord, we have E, G, B. And if we go back to our C major chord, we have C, E, G. So again, E minor and C major share 2 of the same 3 notes. And what this means is that functionally we have these 2 alternatives to the home chord, so we don't have to always keep going back to the home chord, because the thing about the 1 is it's very, very stable, incredibly stable. And we don't always want to go back to that stability. Sometimes we want to create a sense of returning home, but not with the stability that comes with choosing the 1 chord. And so this is where the A minor or the E minor might be perfect substitutions. Our other substitutions functionally are, if we look at our F chord and we now go through to the D minor, which is our 2, the D minor and the F are relatives of each other. So the D minor is the relative minor of F major. And then we have the 5 chord. And the 5 chord has the B diminished as the perfect substitute, again, because they share 2 of the same 3 notes. But what we really care about here is the fact that we have 3 primary functions in operation. We have home, we have departure with the 4 chord, we have getting ready to return with the 5 chord, and we have coming home with the 1. And now that we see that we have these other substitutions for those chords, we get to sub those other chords in and out as we like. So, for example, instead of playing 1, 4, 5, 1, let's substitute that final 1 chord for the relative minor. 1, 4, 5, 6. If we wanted to return home or get ready to return home, instead of going to the 5 chord, we choose the substitution for that, which is the B diminished, and we return home from that chord. And this is really interesting when you start looking at the diatonic system this way, because you realize that as you walk up the scale, you actually get this sequence of home, departure, home, departure. And I'll show you what I mean. We have C, which is home, D minor, which is departure, E minor, which is a version of home, leading into the 4, which is departure, 5 getting ready to return, 6, which is home, or an alternative term, 7, which is getting ready to come back home to the final home key, which is C. Anytime we're playing one of those diatonic chords, it is fitting into one of the 3 functions of home, departure, or returning, getting ready to return. So consider that if you're writing a song and you have the same 4 chords moving through a section, you may want to start to play around with some of these substitutions. If we start with the 1 chord and we go to the 4 chord, that's got a particular sound and a particular mood. The next time I go, I might want to go to the 2 chord. It's still performing the same function of departure, but it's giving us a different sound. It's creating that variety so that we don't become predictable with our chord movements. When you start to play around with these, you realize that you can really spice up a chord progression quite easily. Take a chord progression that sounds quite predictable or repetitive and just substitute a few of the chords, even just 1 or 2 at the right moment, and it's going to give new life to the song. It's going to give a freshness and a sense of movement. But you want to be in control of the chords you're choosing, and you want to really consider the mood of the chords you're choosing, because each of these chords does create a different mood, and it does create a different momentum with the song that you're writing. If you Google most used chord progressions, one of the ones that's on every list is the 1, 5, 6, 4. So the 1, 5, 6, 4 in this case would be the C, to the 5, to the G, to the A minor, which is the 6, to the F, which is the 4. And we've all heard that millions of times. Now, one song that famously uses that sequence in this key is the Beatles' Let It Be. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And in my hour of darkness, she is standing right in front of me, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. So there you can see very much that 1, 5, 6, 4 progression in action and the sound of it. But this idea of understanding where you want the chord progression to go is really important, because in this case, Paul McCartney starts with the root. He moves to the 5. Now the 5 says we're getting ready to return home, at which point he could have gone back to the 1. When I find myself in times of trouble, Mother Mary comes to me. Totally different song. So instead of going back to the root, he's chosen the relative minor as the place he wants to go, because it elevates, it goes with the lyrics. You know, Mother Mary, it's got this idea of spirituality, exaltation. The melody is naturally rising, and he rises with that melody to use the relative minor chord. And there it is. And then he comes back to the 1, speaking words of wisdom, let it be. And you can hear it getting ready to return. In this case, it's going the 1, 5, 4, 1 with that second line, which is just another way of doing it. You know, it's getting ready to return. It goes via the 4, like we heard with the blues example before. We could rearrange Let It Be with some alternate chords. We could say, instead of the G major, we could say B diminished in the first chord. We could go self in times of trouble, Mother Mary, then to the D minor, comes to me. We could do that. These substitutions aren't going to always be perfectly appropriate. What I'm trying to do is talk you through a system of knowing what options you have knowing how these chords function, and then giving yourselves the options of using different chords so that your lines don't get repetitive. Another great song that does this beautifully is Alleluia, Leonard Cohen. And again, we're in the key of C, keep it simple. You have, it's starting with the 1 and then moving down to the relative minor. Heard there was a secret chord David played and it pleased the Lord, but you don't really care for music, do you? That goes like this, the 4th, the 5th, the minor 4, and the major lift. Baffled king composing hallelujah, 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 hallelujah. And here we have, again, a beautiful sounding chord progression. It's completely diatonic, except for the E7, which we'll come back to in a second. We start with the home chord, we go to the relative minor. Back and forth between the home chord and a relative minor, which is a lovely way of staying put. You've created movement, but functionally, there isn't that sense of departure that comes with using the 4 or the 2 chord. So while ever we're going back and forth between these two, it's like we've got a brother and sister having a conversation. And then the 4 chord comes in with the F. That's the first departure. Quick go to the G chord, which gets us ready to return home. Moves back up to the G, and we come round again. But this time, Leonard Cohen is cheekily outlining the chord progression. Well, it goes like this. The 4th, the 5th, the minor 4, referring to the relative minor there, the major lift. Because the 4 chord does have this lifting quality, this beautiful, hopeful quality. And then he moves round to the baffled king on the G chord, getting ready to return home, but before returning home, he moves to an E7 chord. And the E7 chord is technically a borrowed chord. And the reason we kind of think of it in a diatonic way is because it's so often used to pull us back to the A minor. Because if C is our home chord and A minor is our relative, they're in partnership together throughout the song. And this E7 creates a beautiful 5-1 pull towards the A minor. And this is what being in control of your chord progressions and picking the perfect chords really means. It's about choosing the chords that serve a particular function, create a particular mood, carry the melody you're trying to create in a particular way. And lyrically, you want your chord progression to support your lyrics. This is where the substitutions idea becomes so crucial. So it's important to remember that when we're writing a song, the first version of our chord progression may not be the final version. We may write a chord progression that sounds pretty good in the moment and does its job while we're crafting the song. But as we start writing lyrics and as the message of the song and the narrative becomes clearer, we may want to substitute out some chords to match the mood of the lyrics or the intent of the lyrics. And those chord substitutions are a perfect way to do that and still maintain the function that you require. So in picking the perfect chords for your chord progression, a couple of key things you want to think about. Number 1, consider at which points you want your song to be home and at which moments you'd like to be away from home. Number 2, consider what function you would like the chord to perform in relation to the story you're telling. And number 3, consider what mood you're trying to create throughout the sections and which substitutions can deliver that mood. Hope this helps and good luck writing. Bye.